Trump faces the press.
And I think it's a disgrace. I think it's an absolute disgrace.
The president-elect promises to defend the U.S. from Russian hacking, plus the future of his business empire. Intelligence report.
It sounds like it was written by a 15-year-old.
We talked to Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma about allegations the Kremlin has compromising information about Trump. Beware of false idols. Our nightly report from Rome on the Holy Father's message to the faithful. And remembering a Catholic hero. A look back at the life of New York Police Detective Stephen McDonald. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, January 11th, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world. I'm Lauren Ashburn. A defiant President-elect Donald Trump denies reports Russia has compromising personal and financial information about him. And he is also promising to put his billions in a trust before Inauguration Day. Wyatt Goolsbee is in New York with the president-elect. Wyatt?
Lauren, just 9 days before his inauguration, Donald Trump is addressing the media in a news conference, his first in nearly 6 months. He talked about a variety of issues, from diverting from his business empire to some of the top priorities of his administration. But what dominated this highly anticipated event today was his defense of an unverified intelligence report.
As far as hacking, I think it was Russia.
Trump conceding for the first time in public that Russia was likely behind hacking during the election, but denouncing the media for reports that the former Soviet Union has compromising information about him.
And hacking's bad, and it shouldn't be done. But look at the things that were hacked. Look at what was learned from that hacking. That Hillary Clinton got the questions to the debate, didn't report it. That's a horrible thing. That's a horrible thing.
And when asked about his relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin, Trump said it would be an improvement.
If Putin likes Donald Trump, guess what, folks? That's called an asset, not a liability.
After walking past piles of documents he signed to separate himself from his business interests, Donald Trump announced he was passing the baton to his sons.
Don and Eric are going to be running the company. They are going to be running it in a very professional manner. They're not going to discuss it with me. Again, I don't have to do this.
Trump legal advisor Sherry Dillon explained that as president of the United States, Trump would not be legally required to separate himself from his financial assets. But she said he'll donate all hotel profits from foreign governments to the U.S. Treasury. The president-elect repeated plans for a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border.
Mexico will pay for the wall, but it'll be reimbursed. Okay?
He also promised to release the name of his candidate for the Supreme Court vacancy within 2 weeks of taking office. But Trump did not take kindly to all questions from the media, sternly rebuking CNN's Jim Acosta.
I'm not going to give you a question. You are fake news.
And it wasn't just CNN. Trump also called out BuzzFeed, the online publication, saying their report was also fake news. It got pretty contentious there at the end, Lauren, as you saw Jim Acosta had tried to ask a question, and Donald Trump shut him down. Lauren?
Wyatt, it seemed that Donald Trump was more irritated than usual at the press. Is that right?
Yes, it definitely seemed that way, at least at that point in time. And it wasn't just Donald Trump, by the way. It seems like his entire team was frustrated about this issue specifically. At the very beginning of the press conference, Sean Spicer came out and called out several of those news publications for printing or publicating this dossier, which talked about the relationship of these allegations of Russia connection to Trump, supposedly that Russia had some of Trump's financial and personal information. That information, by the way, has not been verified. Spicer reiterated the fact that this is still under investigation. And in fact, Russian President Vladimir Putin has come out and also said that these allegations are fake as well. Lauren?
You were in the press conference in the lobby of Trump Tower right behind you during that exchange. What was the reaction like among the journalists?
I'd say it's a mixed one. I mean, there were some vocal no's. I mean, there were people who were just kind of shocked and looked to see what was going on. Other people just grabbed their iPhones and cameras and making sure they were all eyes were on Trump, if you will. But I would say at that point, there were probably a little bit more than 250 journalists in the room, as you mentioned, in the lobby. Some from different parts of the world, some from Russia, some from China. But like we say, all eyes at that point, at least at that point, were on Trump. Lauren?
Wyatt, let's move on from the media circus. Is there a timeline for the Supreme Court pick? Did he mention that?
Yes, Trump said the plan is to put forward a person's name by the first week of February. He says he wants to get that done pretty quick. He had made reference to a list of more than a dozen that he had mentioned last year that he's thinking about right now. By the way, many of those have been approved by conservatives, many have been approved by pro-lifers. But he says he wants to get that done within the first 2 weeks of his inauguration. He says that's very important, by the way. He realizes a lot of people voted for him for that very reason. Lauren?
Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from New York City. Thank you, Wyatt. During the press conference, Trump also announced his pick for VA Secretary. Trump has picked David Shulkin to lead the Department of Veterans Affairs. He's a Democrat and is currently the top health official for the department. He's a former president of the Morristown Medical Center in New Jersey. If confirmed by the Senate, Shulkin would lead the government's second largest agency. Donald Trump's pick for Secretary of State resists calling the Russian president a war criminal. ExxonMobil's CEO Rex Tillerson faced tough questions from senators about his ties to Vladimir Putin. Capitol Hill reporter Jason Calvi is covering Tillerson's confirmation hearing. Jason.
Lauren, Rex Tillerson tells the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that Russia poses a danger. He says Russian hacking of the 2016 U.S. elections is troubling, and he says it's a fair assumption to assume Vladimir Putin was behind it.
Rex Tillerson lays out his approach to U.S. foreign policy. He suggests he take a hard line as the United States' top diplomat.
In recent decades, we have cast American leadership into doubt. In some instances, we have withdrawn from the world. In others, we have intervened with good intentions, but did not achieve the stability and global security we sought.
Perhaps the toughest Republican questioning came from Senator Marco Rubio.
Is Vladimir Putin a war criminal?
I would not use that term.
When asked about his ties to Russia and Putin, who he's known for 2 decades, Tillerson admitted he hasn't yet discussed a Russia policy with Trump. But his message to Congress today, he won't go easy on Moscow.
Our NATO allies are right to be alarmed at a resurgent Russia. But it was in the absence of American leadership that this door was left open.
Tillerson is a break in long-standing tradition of secretaries of state with long military, political, or diplomatic experience. He tried to calm fears he'd put business first.
My pivot now, if confirmed to be Secretary of State, will have one mission only, and that is to represent the interest of the American people.
We caught up with Senator Bob Corker, a Republican from Tennessee, who's running the confirmation hearing.
The questions have been in very high level. I think the committee has conducted itself well.
Tillerson was asked if he would prioritize an international aid, so-called family planning funds, about $500 million in U.S. funds. He said that was an important level of support.
Jason, what are the odds he'll be confirmed?
It's really hard to predict. You saw there the Senator Marco Rubio really blasting Tillerson today. Some of the Democrats who have met privately with him have said some of their fears have been calmed by his talk of Russia and on climate change as well.
And what did he say specifically about climate change?
Yeah, today he said climate change does exist. He says it warrants action, but he didn't say what that action should be. Lauren?
Jason Calvi on Capitol Hill. Thank you, Jason. Joining us now is Senator James Lankford from Oklahoma. Senator Lankford, welcome back to the program. You're on the Homeland Security Committee and the Intelligence Committee, which gives you a broader insight into security issues. You've said that you're convinced Russia is behind the hacking. And what do you think of these new allegations that the Kremlin has compromising information on Donald Trump?
You know, I've read through the intelligence information about the hacking and the background information. I'm very convinced that the Russians are engaged in the hack and the attack. I'm also very convinced they had no effect on the election. They weren't involved in changing votes or any of that kind of stuff. They were just putting out propaganda. When I read the report and all the details of this latest compromising information from the Russian, it sounds like it was written by a 15-year-old when you actually read the information. So I am absolutely not convinced any of that is authentic. They say this is some unnamed sources sources, that the unnamed source also has unnamed sources, and they put it out. This looks like fake news to me when you actually read it and go through it. There are factual errors that are in it. There are things that are verified to not be accurate, and I have not met anyone in the intelligence community that actually thinks that information is real.
Well, Donald Trump is also highly critical of U.S. intelligence agencies. Do you think that that criticism is valid?
I don't, actually. I think these are men and women that work exceptionally hard. They can't always get it right. They get their best judgment. And when you do intelligence operations, you're gathering information about what's happening around the world, the risks that we face. You put those ideas together and you put a low, medium, or high probability that this is accurate. But you can never know 100% because obviously you're not in the head of some other leader internationally. And so I think they do a very good job of gathering it together. And it's amazing to me to meet some of the men and women that serve around the world in the intelligence community. They literally serve Americans every single day, put their lives on the line every single day, just like our military and our law enforcement do. But they don't wear a uniform, and most Americans will never be able to say thank you to them for what they do for our country.
Let's move on to the Department of Homeland Security. John Kelly, who is Trump's nominee to head that department, has said securing the border will be one of his top priorities, but it requires more than a wall, and it could be a layered defense. In your opinion, what needs to happen first in securing our border?
No, I think he's accurate on the layered defense part of it. And I was a part of that hearing yesterday when we actually had him on the stand, and he and I have also visited in the office. He's a tremendous leader, been a tremendous general, and he understands what it means to be able to protect, for instance, a forward operating base somewhere in hostile territory. You not only have a wall around that operating base, but you also have maybe a smaller fence. You also have people in it. You have some sort of cameras and security. What he described was very similar of what we would have in the border, that we would have in some places physical barriers where that makes total sense. In many places, cameras or watchtowers, but it's always about people that it can actually engage in this. When you've got a border as long as we have in the north and in the south and our maritime borders, that will involve a lot of technology, being able to scan and to be able to try to pick up people in the area. But then we have to have great team members that can actually interdict those individuals when they try to move into our country illegally. So he described that multiple layers on that. It will take that multiple layers to actually go through the process. The easiest first step to do is training. And that's right. The easiest first step to do is the people side of it, to make sure that we're actually putting the people in the right spot and then making sure we're getting the equipment around them to be able to help them.
Before we go, I know that you are staunchly pro-life, and the defunding of Planned Parenthood is at the top of the agenda, especially when it comes to repealing Obamacare. Some senators, including Susan Collins, have said that they are going to fight the defunding of Planned Parenthood. How do you think you and or your colleagues are going to change their minds?
So there are two aspects of this. We've got to have 51 votes to be able to do two different things right now on Planned Parenthood. One is to defund Planned Parenthood. That's the Medicaid portion of it. It's about 2/3 of their funding. And then there's a regulation that the administration has put in place in just the last couple of months preventing states from defunding Planned Parenthood within their state on Title X funds. We also can get with a 51 vote that to give the states the right to be able to defund Planned Parenthood in their own state. So I would expect in the months ahead that we'll have two separate votes dealing with Planned Parenthood. One is the national level funding. The other one is allowing states to also defund as well as they choose to. But I would remind everyone, Planned Parenthood does 300,000 abortions a year of the 1 million. Defunding Planned Parenthood doesn't solve the life issue. It obviously helps promote life again, and it's the right thing to be able to do. But we have to keep our eye on the ball. Long term, this is really about life, not just Planned Parenthood. This is just one step in a long process. Okay, thank you. Senator James Lankford, Homeland Security Committee and the Intelligence Committee, a Republican from Oklahoma. Thanks for joining us. Thank you. The confirmation hearing for Trump's pick for Attorney General is over. Those lobbying for and against Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions spoke out on Capitol Hill today.
Principled, intelligent, knowledgeable, thorough, modest, and thoroughly dedicated to the rule of law and to the mission of the department.
His record indicates that we cannot count on him to support state and national efforts towards bringing justice to the justice system.
Senator Booker is the first sitting senator to testify against a fellow senator seeking a cabinet spot. Despite his vocal opponents, Sessions is expected to win confirmation. Elaine Chao is expected to sail through the confirmation process. The Transportation Secretary nominee wants to boost infrastructure funding by, quote, unleashing the potential of private investors.
And I look forward to working with you to rebuild, refurbish, and revitalize America's infrastructure so our economy can continue to grow.
Elaine Chao has a long track record in Washington. She was Deputy Secretary of Transportation under George H.W. Bush and Labor Secretary under George W. Bush. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. The president of the predominantly Catholic country of the Philippines has ordered government agencies to provide free access to contraceptives for 6 million women who cannot obtain them. Officials there say making contraceptives available is important to reduce poverty. The use of artificial contraceptives is considered against church teaching. The Holy Father uses the example of a woman who once told him she had an abortion to preserve her figure as a warning against worshiping idols.
Ho dovuto abortire perché la mia figura è molto importante.
The Holy Father cautions the faithful about the false hope that beauty, wealth, and power can give. The Pope was speaking to pilgrims in the Vatican about the virtue of hope at his weekly audience. Elise Harris, Rome correspondent for our news partner, Catholic News Agency, joins us now. Elise, tell us about that dramatic example the Holy Father gave.
You know, Pope Francis was really fiery in his audience today. He often uses stories to illustrate a point, and so he went off the cuff telling a story about how when he was in Buenos Aires, he heard a story about a woman who had had an abortion in order to keep her figure, which he said is an attitude that's idolatrous and leads us away from Christ.
Pope Francis also gave some reasons why we can be tempted to worship false idols. What were those?
He said that those temptations can really arise when difficulties do. So when we face challenges and difficulties in life, we're tempted to find an easy fix that maybe offers a temporary solution. But in the end, trusting in God really means persevering in faith and in hope, even when it's difficult.
How about the lure of money? I think that I read that he ended his audience by pointing out a real problem that people face. What was he saying that people should watch out for?
You know, he warned the pilgrims that were in the audience against the people who try to charge them to get in. He pulled out a ticket and he actually pointed to it and said that in 6 languages on the ticket, it's written that it's free. Entrance is free, so people can visit with the Pope and have a moment with him. So if anybody charges them or tries to get money from them to get into the audience, don't listen.
Elise Harris, our Rome correspondent with the Catholic News Agency, thank you for giving us a wrap-up of the Pope's audience. Coming up, an emotional goodbye from President Obama.
Yes, we can. Yes, we did.
He highlights his accomplishments. Our panel analyzes his legacy and its impact on the Catholic Church. In his final address, President Obama thanks a crowd of 18,000 in Chicago. He touted what he sees as his successes and focused on themes of social justice, fairness, and diversity. The president had one more request for the country.
The same thing I asked when you took a chance on me 8 years ago. I'm asking you to believe, not in my ability to bring about change, but in yours.
President Obama momentarily fought back tears as he thanked his wife and daughters. He also spoke to Vice President Joe Biden and his wife, Jill, saying their friendship has been one of the great joys of his life. Joining us now to discuss the president's farewell address and other topics are Tim Carney, commentary editor of the Washington Examiner, and Star Parker, president of the Center for Urban Renewal and Education. Welcome to the program, both of you.
Well, thank you.
Star, for American Catholics and Christians, what will be the defining moments of the president's presidency?
I think that we should be very concerned that the president changed this country for maybe 100 years, depending on what happens on the Supreme Court over the next couple. When you think about the worldview that he portrayed through his presidency, that he portrayed going into it, a very secular and statist worldview, that this is problematic to Christians all over the world, and in particular here in America, to watch their religious liberty unravel because of things they fundamentally believe because of the scriptures.
Tim.
I agree. I think you can't overstate how much the sort of battleground in the culture wars had shifted, where the left could sort of plausibly argue to be arguing on the defensive, 20 years ago. Now it's very clear when you see what they tried to do to the Little Sisters of the Poor, the Hobby Lobby case, that they are going to use big government to push their side in the culture war. That it's not about us letting other people live their lives how they want to. It's about them telling us that we have to follow the rules. That wasn't the case. It's hard to remember now, but the church believers weren't under such attack from the federal government so much before Obama did it, and state governments have followed too.
Star, you said that it's set us back. How difficult will it be to reverse?
Well, it depends on how you do that. It set us back because we have now persecution of Christians in America. This is just unprecedented. This country was founded fleeing to found this country in Christianity. They were fleeing this type of persecution. So it set us back. Some are saying that Trump has come in and is almost going to be like Constantine. Well, if he is, that could be pretty problematic in some degree. But on the other side, Constantine built the church.
All right, let's move on to today's news. And Trump praised some of the press today at the news conference, but he also really lit into them for some fake news, is what he is calling it. Is this a warning sign of what we can expect for journalists, or is it a wake-up call, an opportunity for Christian media maybe to get more play in the White House?
I saw some reasons to be cheered by what Trump was doing, where he said, I'm the guy who has the actual power to stand up to the media that will lie about you and lie to you. And that's true, but then he went and he folded CNN in with BuzzFeed. In the background there was BuzzFeed published these unverified rumors, just the actual documents, while CNN was very careful. They followed the rules of journalism. So Trump is lumping people who kind of broke the rules of journalism in with people who just reported a story he didn't like. That's where I got worried, where his idea of standing up to the lying media also includes kind of cracking down on people who are critical of him. So it's a very tricky line there.
A fine line.
Watch it. We need to watch it because in that same amendment that gives us our constitutional rights to be free to worship, the First Amendment is also the amendment that gives us the right for an open and free press.
Star, let's wrap up here. We have just a little bit of time, but Ben Carson's confirmation hearing is tomorrow, and I interviewed him during the conventions. We talked about the importance of his faith. He works with you on helping poor communities. He's served on the advisory board of your organization. How will his faith and advocacy work influence what he does?
Well, he did serve on our advisory board, and he did not work hand in hand. In fact, he has chaired a literacy program all across this country with his wife, Candy, and it's fascinating that he is going to now head up HUD. HUD is the only anti-poverty program that touches every American's life and was responsible for the economic crash in 2008. So it's intriguing that he has taken that type of brilliance, being a medical doctor, taken that type of understanding of these communities by running literacy programs in our most hardest hit neighborhoods, Title I children, to now help them understand housing policy. And let's get this one right this time so that we don't have a collapse again.
All right. Thank you so much, Star Parker and Tim Carney of the Washington Examiner. Up next, Charleston church shooting. Victims' families react to Dylan Roof's death sentence. And a lesson in forgiveness. We'll pay tribute to a late New York police detective who put his faith into practice. It's in God's hands. That's what one victim's family member tells the Charleston church shooting mass murderer. A judge formally sentenced an unrepentant Dylan Roof to death today, and some relatives of the 9 slain worshipers reacted angrily. Others offered forgiveness and love.
He's in God's hands now. And if he turns his life around, if he makes an humble confession to God, when he gets there, he can join my sister and the other 8 in heaven.
Roof insisted he was not mentally ill, did not call any witnesses or present any evidence during the trial. Congress examines a worldwide problem that's been called modern slavery. A new Senate report alleges the website Backpage.com covered for child sex traffickers. This comes after an almost 2-year investigation into the company and its practices. This week, the website announced it closed its adult section because of the report. To read more on this story, visit our partners at the Catholic News Agency at catholicnewsagency.com. Claire Hollingworth didn't know why God made her brave, but he did. This is one of the most famous female journalists. She died at age 105. At 27, she broke the news that Germany invaded Poland, starting World War II. And tonight, we remember a New York police detective who publicly forgave the shooter who left him paralyzed. Detective Stephen McDonald died yesterday after suffering a heart attack. He spoke about his Catholic faith and shared his story on forgiveness on EWTN. McDonald was 29 years old. In 1986, when he was shot by a 15-year-old in New York Central Park, he forgave the teenager and said he was grateful to God for sparing his life. Stephen McDonald was 59 years old. His son Connor was born 6 months after the shooting, and he's now a sergeant with the NYPD. He's the 4th generation to serve in the department. Connor posted this picture on Facebook saying, "I'll see you on the other side, Daddy-O. I love you forever." That does it for us this evening. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, I'm Lauren Ashburn. Good night, and God bless.